We are an experience design company focused on helping organizations improve people's health, finances, and education. I focus on organizational design. I help organizations understand how to arrange people in organizational structures, processes, policies. Get play. Yes. Awesome. Beautiful. Awesome. Round of applause for our setting up. Yes. I help companies understand how to get their people to collaborate better, how to be more innovative, how to talk better to one another. And that's what I want to talk about today. I started my career 15 years ago as a designer in a large financial services company. I was one person in a building of about 5,000 people, and I was just out of college. Actually, I was still in college working my way through, and I had the luxury of being there when user experience first started to take hold in the company. And I became a part of that team, and in the 9 years I was there, that team grew to a whopping 5 people, and then back down to 4. And I was a part of it the whole way through. And that was great, but I was young and I was stupid. And every day I would bitch to my managers about the inane, dumbass conversations that I was forced to have with the other areas of the company that I had to do work for. And every day, like, you can't believe what these people were saying to me. And my manager would just sigh, say, Adam, it'll get better. And every day she'd just rub my back and tell me, it's gonna get over, it's gonna be fine. One day, we got a call. We were only 4 people again. We wanted to make as many good connections in the company as possible. We get this phone call, and it's a team, and they want us to help with their project, but they don't have a budget to bring us in. So they ask, can you look at our designs for us and then send us your feedback? Yeah, sure. You know, we want good connections, because the more good connections we have, the more support we have, the more people we can make an argument that we should hire. And so they send us their designs, and my teammate, who's responsible for gathering all our feedback and giving it back to them, calls a meeting, and 4 of us get together in our meeting room, which is down in the basement, no windows, total dungeon. The slides go up on the projector. What the fuck is that? First words out of anybody's mouth. A drop down, really? Who's the asshole that thought that was a good idea? And that went on for an hour straight. And at the end of that hour, my teammate, who had to take notes, send those notes back, put her head down on the table and cried. Because there was absolutely nothing there that she could actually give to them that was of any use whatsoever. And she tried. I mean, she spent like 2 days combing through, like, what did we mean when we said this person's a dipshit? Can I get anything out of that? It was at that point that I realized that we all kind of struggle when we're talking about design, when we're talking about what we should make and how things should work and how they should look. And that started me off on this kind of 5-year sprint in my career, where I've been working with organizations to understand how people talk to each other when they're talking about creations and how to do it better. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. Because I think, as you can all probably attest to, as you've all probably experienced, at some point in your career, you've had a very painful conversation. You've had that conversation where you are just looking at the clock, waiting for it to be over so that you can go back to your desk, grab the bottle out of the bottom drawer, curl up underneath, and wait for the day to end. Conversations can hurt, but we have to have conversations as a part of the work we do. We have to work with other people. We have to talk to them. We have to understand what they're thinking. We have to share what we're thinking. We have to come to some sort of decision on what we're going to do to move forward. We have to converse. And none of this is news to any of you. But like I said, I've been doing this for 5 years now. And so I've gone out, I've worked with lots of different organizations, and I love to ask people, what's the best feedback you've ever gotten in a meeting? And I get things like this. Now, I don't know why anybody in their right mind would ever show work that did not have enough la 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 la. Like, that's something you just don't do. They don't let you graduate if you do that. And again, so no one thinks I'm biased. These are quotes from designers to other people. We all struggle with this. We all struggle when we talk about the things we're creating, things other people have created. And what it boils down to, when I look at the conversations people are having, is whether or not there's this certain thing that's a part of the thought process. This thing called critical thinking. Do you all remember critical thinking from grade school? You were all tested on it.
I failed.
It's this simple little thing where you ask yourself a question and you decide, is that true or false? And you make a case for it. And that's what we should be doing in our conversations. We should be looking at the things we create and asking, does this work towards the objectives that I have for it? True or false? Why or why not? It's been a long time since I've been at a Creative Mornings. I'm curious, how many of you are designers? Web designers, graphic designers, interaction designers? Okay. Anybody a photographer? Illustrator? Some other field of creative work? How many of you do not have clients? All of you that do have clients, whether you answer yes to being a designer or no, you are a designer. You have to make something that someone else is going to consume, is going to pay for. You are doing something to solve a problem, to respond to a challenge, to capitalize on an opportunity. You have an objective. And that objective is what you're designing for. Whether you're taking a photo or drawing something or designing an app, I don't care what it is. If you're making something to solve for an objective, you are designing. And when you talk about the things you're creating, you need to make sure that you are considering critical thinking. You are asking yourself whether or not you are meeting those objectives. And that all comes back to this thing called critique. How many of you went to school that had critique in it? How many of those critiques made you cry? I had one of those. It was awful. I was a film student. Whew. Flashbacks. Critique does not have to be painful. It's not about tearing people down. It's about continuous improvement. It's about iteration. It's about determining what aspects of what you've created are working and which ones aren't, so that you can take that and make what you're creating even better. And I want to talk today about the habits that we tend to have that get in the way of critique. The first is that we react. And this is the people we're showing our work to reacting to our work. And it's also us reacting to the dumbass things that come out of their mouths when they react to our work. We have to make sure that we stop ourselves from just pronouncing that reaction. Because you're going to have it, but it's not always going to be material to the conversation. So you need to ask yourself, am I responding to the fact that this color blue makes me want to throw up because it actually matters? Or does that not matter because that's my own personal preference and I'm not really the consumer here? Right? So we need to make sure that we think about that reaction. We don't just project it. We get selfish a lot. We're very selfish people. We want our solution to be right. We want ours to be the one that's made. Whether that's because we are the actual creator, we're the person doing the work, or because someone else did it, but we have an idea of what it could have been. Damn, it would have been awesome if that's what they had come up with. But they didn't. So it's time for us to say what we think it should be, because we want that known. Your clients get a little selfish sometimes. Everybody gets selfish sometimes. The next time Apple or Facebook or Twitter or somebody releases some new change, watch the streams for like 5 minutes and see what people start saying. Isn't it all productive? No. It's about wanting attention. It's about wanting someone to say, hey, that guy's got good ideas. Right? But that's not what the purpose of the conversation is. So we have to make sure that when we're having conversations, when we're talking about the things we're creating, we're really thinking, am I saying this because I see something that could be improved or something that's working really well in this design? Or am I saying it because I think it could have been different? Or I would like somebody to look at me for a second. We don't start with a common foundation. I do a lot of business consulting. The number of times that I come out of a meeting asking people what they think they're all working on, and I get different answers from everybody that came out of that meeting, is insane. People have these different perspectives of what they're trying to achieve with a project. People have different goals. If everybody is working towards a different set of goals, everybody's going to have a different idea for what the solution should be. And your conversations aren't going to go anywhere. So making sure to take the time up front to gather everybody's goals, identify any conflicts, work those out, and come up with a shared foundation, a shared set of objectives, then that's going to make your project and every conversation you have then after much, much better. Anybody ever sent an email saying, hey, here's what I put together, can you send me your feedback? Nobody in this room has ever done that. How's that go? Never go well? When we're giving feedback on people's creations, when we're talking about the things we're making, there's going to be questions. There's going to be things we don't know. We need to be able to have a dialogue. We need to be able to ask questions. What were you trying to achieve here? What led you to make that decision? Okay? We need to be able to get that response back from the creator and use that to formulate our next interjection. If we don't do that, then we're just making up everything based on some assumption. My father was always a fan of that stupid old phrase, assuming makes an ass out of you and me. I just taught that to my 10-year-old. He loves it because he's an ass. But it's true. But the easiest way to get rid of an assumption is to verbalize it. I'm assuming that you were trying to do this. Am I right? Yes or no? Right? And then I can make my feedback, my thoughts, more practical, more realistic, because I now know better what they were trying to do. We often don't talk about strengths. We have this tendency to focus on the negative. Right? As human beings, negative experiences leave a much bigger mark on us than positive ones. Because just to survive, we try very hard to avoid negative experiences. So we tend to focus on the things that we don't think are working, the things that we think are wrong. But what if you spent an entire conversation focusing on everything you think is not working about whatever it is that you've created? And after that, that person goes and they take what they're working on and they work on it some more. They try to address all those things you talked about. And they bring it back to you. And then you see it. And all the things that had been awesome the first time they showed it to you aren't there anymore. They somehow got changed in the process because you never talked about them. Not only that, but as designers, as any kind of a creative thinker, one of the best skills we have, the greatest tools that we can use, is the ability to look at a solution in one area abstract its concept, and apply that solution to a new problem. And if we look at our own creations that way, we might find ways to strengthen the things that aren't working by borrowing from what already is. So we need to make sure that in these conversations, we're not just looking for what could be improved upon, but also what kicks ass already. We don't focus enough. We have a tendency to say, hey, I'd like your feedback on this, or what do you think? What do I think about what? The colors you use, the typeface, structure, look and feel, content, functionality. Could be anything. But that makes it really hard for people to give feedback. I don't know where I should start. It's like having too many choices and being able to not decide. We need to make sure that we focus the conversation. Hey, I want to talk about this scenario. Someone's going to use this to do X. And this is how they're going to walk through it. What do you think about that? Do you think we'll help them get to that objective? Do you think that the way I've laid this out will help people see the information they need to see? We need to be able to focus our conversations so that we can get meaningful feedback. We defend. This was how I was taught to critique. In film school, we were taught you had to go show your work, and then you had to stand there and defend it. And the rest of the audience's job was to try to take it down. And if you could succeed at doing that, you had somehow mastered this skill. When we get defensive, we aren't necessarily rational or open-minded in any way, because we're only trying to make sure that our idea survives. But when we're designing something, it isn't about whether our idea survives. It's about coming up with the best solution, the solution that provides the best value. And to be able to do that, we need to be able to listen to other people's feedback. We need to be able to listen to other people as they analyze what we've created against our objectives. And we need to be able to take that into account. So we shouldn't be defending our creations, just explaining our rationale. This is how I got to this point. I did this research and it showed me that. Or I looked at these competitors and I noticed these patterns. Whatever that rationale is, you put that out there. You let people ask questions about it. But you don't defend. And we don't participate. I work with a lot of students, and I ask them to do critiques. And the first thing most people do when they do a critique is if they have to stand up, they will hold their design in front of them like some kind of a shield to protect them from everything that's about to hit them. And they just present quickly, and then they like, oh my God, it's coming, I know it's coming. If we were, as creators, to step around and get with everybody else who's looking at our work and analyzing it, and to start analyzing it with them, it does a couple of things for us. First, it's going to help everybody else feel a little better about analyzing your work, because people often grow up with that if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all mentality. And that can't fly in these kinds of situations. We need honesty. So if they see you analyzing the work, they'll feel a little better about it too. The other thing is that creating anything gives us this weird paternal instinct and feeling towards it. We want to protect it. We don't want anybody to say anything's bad about our baby. Right? Nobody wants an ugly baby. But we need to be able to separate ourselves from our work, because we need to be able to admit that there might be flaws, that there might be ways that it can be improved upon. And if we analyze it with the other people in the conversation, that helps us learn how to step back, how to detach ourselves from what we've created. We problem solve. We jump immediately to solutions. Oh, that's not working? Well, we could do this instead. But if you do that, you instantly flip the conversation. Your brain has two modes of thinking. You can be generative or you can be analytical. You cannot do both at the same time. Your brain cannot function that way. It's one or the other. And often our brains are toggling between these really fast. But in these conversations, we need to make sure we keep everybody on that same side of the toggle. So if you start proposing solutions, other people in the room are trying to analyze the new solution. Some are trying to analyze the existing solution that you proposed to them. Some are trying to come up with new ideas. And it gets really hard to manage that conversation. And lastly, we confuse critiques in these kinds of conversations with reviews. Any of you in your organizations have something called a design review? It's a common practice. And in a lot of the organizations that I coach, I'll go in and I'll ask, okay, where are you getting your feedback from? And they'll say, I get it in the design reviews. And then I ask, okay, what happens in these design reviews? What are they intended to do? Almost always, these kinds of conversations are intended to be kind of a pass-fail, some kind of a gate to allow you to move on. Yep, you're done with that, it's good enough, time to move on to the next thing. But that's not what these kinds of conversations are necessarily about. We're trying to improve the things we're creating. We're trying to iterate, right? And these kinds of gates aren't about iteration. Instead, they produce checklists. Move that to the left, make that red, change that typeface by a couple points. Right? That's not what this kind of a dialogue should be about. We need to be able to understand all the things that are and aren't working and then take that away and generate a new set of solutions, a new set of improvements. So confusing these two can actually make it really hard to get good feedback. Right? If you really want to have better design discussions, don't wait until the design review for them. Grab people randomly whenever you have an opportunity. Schedule formal critiques at points that aren't dependent on your timeline necessarily for moving ahead. And that's where I want to leave you today. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes, so let's do Q&A. If you have a question, comment, complaint, I doubt there are any of those. Compliments, raise your hand. Adam will call on you, and we can do that.
So, what do you do when you're in, kind of the sessions with people where you're going through a critique, and let's say you are asking very targeted questions, but the response is very dismissive? Because I deal with that a lot whenever I'm trying to get feedback on something. I'll ask targeted questions, and I'll get very I love it. I'm like, well, okay, well, what do you love about it? So how do you handle those sorts of situations where you have people that are kind of checked out from the conversation?
Well, the first thing is to ask what or why. There's a technique called the 5 whys, or laddering is how it's used in research, where you ask why repeatedly to get to the root cause of something. And if they keep dismissing it over and over again, then it's likely that they have nothing material really to say. Right? And so then you kind of have to weigh your options. I'm in a room full of people. This person doesn't really have anything that seems of value right now. What are my options? Is this person really critical? Do I need their feedback? Is not getting their feedback going to kill me later? Right? Can I get feedback from other people in the room? And then I use that to try to make my next call, which is, okay, I'm going to move on from you and I'm going to try to focus on other people. And I'll call on you maybe next time I know that something we're talking about relates to what you do. Or sometimes I play the card of, look, I'm really trying to make sure we make this the strongest design possible. And in order to do that, I need to understand from you what you think is and isn't working about this particular objective. I call them out on it. I am not afraid to call people out on things. I think a lot of designers get really timid about that, which can happen when we're working in a service industry, which is what officially design really is. But in a collaborative environment, you need to be able to put something out and say, hey, I need you to give me this feedback. And so that's like my last step, if I have to. But if I've gone through 5 whys, if I've tried maybe coming at the question a couple different ways and I'm still not getting anything out of them, then I let them know, hey, you're not really giving me anything to change about this, so I'm just going to move forward. Right? I'm going to assume that you're good with it as it is, and I'm going to look for other things that we can work on. But it sounds like you're good with this. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
How do you respond if a client proposes their own solution, like design solution?
Yeah.
Like sometimes they do that.
Oh yeah. I got that in an email once. I got a friend of mine, his wife's a designer. She emailed me one night. She's like, my client, I sent them my designs, and instead of sending me their feedback, they sent me their own sketches. Like, she's like, how the hell do I deal with this? And we talked about it for a while. And the first thing is to take a deep breath. Because your immediate instinct will be like, where the fuck do you think they are? So what I try to do in those situations and say, okay, they're trying to communicate with me, right? This is how they felt they could get their message to me easiest. So I should just be happy that they're trying to communicate with me, right? And so then I look at their work and I say, okay, what is it about their work that's different from mine? What are they trying to achieve? What possible objectives do they have, or what possible problems do they have with what I created? If they even looked at what I created, because that's a complete possibility too. They need that to even look at it. Once I've kind of inventoried that for myself, then I talk to them about it and say, okay, I see your solution, can you walk me through it? I basically flip the critique on them. We're now going to critique their work together in comparison to what I proposed. Help me understand what you didn't think was working in this original design that you think your solution addresses better, right? And it's getting them to talk about the cases and the thinking that they went through to create what they came up with. Because realistically, there's a chance that what they've shown you may have a better idea in it. There might be some improvements there. And what you need to be able to do is extract those things from them, right? You need to extract what's working in yours. You need to extract what's working in theirs. And then maybe you can match the two up, right? And then from that point on, once we've kind of gotten the conversation at that point, we're looking at, okay, here's everything that works in option A, and here's everything that's working in option B. And then I say, okay, well, work with me to put these together. Because if I know now that this is a person who thinks in terms of solutions like this, then I know the next time I go off and I create something and I send it to them, I'm probably going to get a new design back from them as well. So rather than put myself through that hell one more time, I'm now going to try to work collaboratively the next time. So now I might do some collaborative sketching and say, okay, how do we combine these elements? Let's get together on the whiteboard. Does that make sense?
Yes.
4.
Adam, I find a lot of people talk and talk. Few people can listen, but very few people can have a discussion. What do you do to engender that, or train them, or bring them around to the whole idea of discussing?
Questions. Questions are always your best tool as a designer. Asking why, asking what do you think if, right? How might we? I ask them lots of questions and try to get them to engage with answers, right? And then depending on the type of conversation we have, it's about getting them to think about, okay, well, what would the effects of whatever you just said be, right? You know, if we didn't change the way this functions today, what might that effect be? And so you get them into this kind of a predictive state, almost a philosophical state of, well, I think this might happen. And once you've gotten them into that state, then actually discussions become a lot easier, because now most of them will admit to, at least in some way, it's a guess, right? They can't predict the future. Some people will say they can predict the future, that they absolutely know what's going to happen. You kind of have to work around that. But if you can get them into that predictive, imagine if state, that's what I try to go for. Other questions? You have pretty sure.
Sure. Well, I guess I have 2 questions. The first would be, what about when design reviews tend to be kind of a love fest, I suppose, and they're not actually pushing hard enough to push things further? And then different from that is, kind of what do you see the role of kind of maybe it's A/B testing or trying both and seeing which one rises to the top?
Yep. So on the love fest thing, yeah, if people just give you like, oh, it's awesome, like, it might feel good, like, oh man, that was a big warm hug, like I did a good job. but it's not really helpful. And that's where participating really comes into play. So that's when I start to be hard on myself, and I try to start picking it apart and saying, well, I'm not so sure that this is as good as it could be, and I'll talk about a specific aspect, right? And I try to get them to think about it, because oftentimes what they're not doing is focusing. Even if you've already asked them to focus on a specific thing, they're not focusing, and that's why they're not really giving you any kind of constructive feedback. So I try to force that hand by doing it myself and trying to pull them along with me, right? And then on the A/B question, I think that critiques are actually a great feeder for those kinds of activities. So often in a critique, you might come across a situation where you end up with two people, maybe both in leadership roles, or just they can't agree, right? There's one person thinks, oh, this is going to cause this result, and one person thinks, oh, it's going to cause this effect, right? And at those times where you just really can't come to any kind of consensus, that's usually where I say, okay, well, is there a way for us to prototype this quickly and see what the effect might actually be, right? You know, paper prototypes or whatever the case might be. Or if you've got a usability study coming up, maybe it feeds into the moderator's guide for that usability study. And so that's how I use critique to kind of feed into that process. Yes?
So there are scenarios where you can check all of the appropriate boxes and you can talk about your assumptions and do the mood board. And there sometimes are times where the R1 just isn't what you want. So what's the best way to deliver that type of feedback?
The best way to deliver it is to talk about, so it's not necessarily binary. Is working, isn't working, right? It's all kind of areas of gray. So what I try to do often is pick one thing, one aspect, a certain scenario we're designing for, a certain goal, a certain persona, whatever the case might be, right? Or a certain piece of functionality. And focus on that for a minute with them. Talk about, okay, what's the objective here? And we'll talk about, okay, well, how is this working towards the objective? And then we'll talk about kind of like what little ideas they had, like what their thought process is, even if it didn't come through in execution. And then I flip the switch to be, okay, more of that, right? So it's not about yes or no, it's about more of, right? And that tends to kind of help them see that, okay, this wasn't a complete fail, there's some good ideas in here. You might not be able to see them on first glance, but I had some good thought process, and now I just got to build on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think we're good. All right, everybody, one more round of applause.